I bought my dream house and invited my family to celebrate with me, but they ignored me and chose to attend the celebration for my spoiled brother getting his driver's license, after 5 attempts. Before continuing the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you won't miss more stories, and leave your like on the video. I'm 32 years old, and I just bought my first house. Let me tell you, that sentence feels surreal even as I write it. After 5 years of saving every penny, living with roommates who left dirty dishes in the sink for weeks and borrowed my things without asking, I finally have a place that's entirely mine. The keys felt heavy in my hand when the realtor passed them over yesterday morning at 10:15 a.m. sharp. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small backyard with an old oak tree, and most importantly, a front door that only I control. The mortgage payments will be tight, $1,147 monthly, but I've run the numbers 100 times as a CPA. I can make this work without anyone else's help. I spent all day Saturday cleaning and arranging furniture. My savings account went from $47,000 to practically empty, but seeing my couch in my living room, my books on my shelves, made every sacrifice worth it. I even bought real wine glasses instead of the plastic cups I'd been using for years. 6 matching plates, cloth napkins, actual silverware, things I'd never owned because shared living spaces never felt permanent enough to invest in. The house sits on Maple Street in a quiet neighborhood where people actually wave when they pass by. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought over homemade cookies and welcomed me to the area. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. That's when I decided to throw a housewarming dinner. Nothing fancy, just family. I texted our group chat Sunday morning, "House dinner tomorrow at 7, making lasagna. Can't wait to show you all around." The responses came quickly. Mom with heart emojis saying, "So proud of you, honey." My older sister confirming she'd bring dessert. Even my younger brother responding with, "Wouldn't miss it for the world." I spent Monday after work at Mason's Grocery, buying ingredients for my grandmother's lasagna recipe, the one everyone always requests at family gatherings. I picked out yellow sunflowers for the dining room table, bought those cloth napkins I'd been eyeing, and even found matching ceramic plates at the discount store. This was going to be perfect. My first real dinner party in my own home. Tuesday evening, I set the table for 6. My parents, my older sister and her husband, my younger brother, and me. The lasagna was bubbling in the oven, garlic bread warming alongside it. I'd made a Caesar salad from scratch and even attempted homemade tiramisu the night before, following a YouTube tutorial twice to get it right. The house smelled incredible. Garlic, herbs, and that warm feeling of home I'd been chasing for years. 7 o'clock came and went. Then 7:15. I checked my phone, no new messages. At 7:30, I texted the group, "Everything's ready when you are. House smells amazing." At 8, I called my mother, straight to voicemail. My sister's phone did the same. By 8:15, I was standing at my living room window, watching for headlights that never came. That's when I saw the Instagram story. My younger brother at Romano's Steakhouse downtown, raising a champagne flute with our entire family around a decorated table. The caption read, "Finally got my license. 5th time's the charm. Best family ever." Posted 37 minutes ago. There they were, all of them. My parents beaming with pride, my sister and her husband clinking glasses, even our aunt and uncle who I hadn't seen in months. Everyone celebrating my 25-year-old brother's driver's license while I sat alone at my dining room table with a feast for 6 and wilted sunflowers. I turned off my phone and ate lasagna in silence, staring at the empty chairs I'd so carefully arranged with my new cloth napkins. The tiramisu went untouched. The wine I'd splurged on remained unopened. My first dinner party in my dream house, and I was the only guest. Later that night, lying in my own bedroom for the first time, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. This wasn't just disappointment about a missed dinner. This was the moment I understood exactly where I stood in my family's priorities. I woke up Wednesday morning with a headache and 6 missed calls from my mother. The dining room still looked like a failed celebration. Those ceramic plates I'd never used, cloth napkins folded just so, and that centerpiece of sunflowers that now seemed ridiculous in the morning light. My phone buzzed as I was scraping untouched lasagna into containers. Mom's text was typical and direct. "We need to talk. Can you come by today after work? It's important." Not, "Sorry we missed your dinner," or "Congratulations on your beautiful new home." Just the assumption that I'd drop everything because she deemed something important. The same pattern I'd been living with for 16 years, since I got my first job at Murphy's Diner to help with household expenses. I wrapped the untouched tiramisu and put it in my new refrigerator. then sat at my kitchen counter with coffee and really examined those Instagram photos again. There was my brother, grinning like he'd won the lottery, surrounded by our parents, my sister and her husband, even our aunt and uncle. A whole celebration I knew nothing about, planned while my dinner invitation sat in our family group chat. The comments were what really stung. "So proud of you, sweetie," from Mom, the same mom who hadn't even called to cancel on my dinner. "Never give up on your dreams," from my sister, who'd promised to bring dessert. Dreams? He'd failed his driving test 4 times because he wouldn't study the manual or practice parallel parking. I'd offered to help him prepare months ago, printing out practice tests and offering to take him to empty parking lots, and he'd laughed it off, saying he'd wing it like always. Meanwhile, I'd been planning this housewarming for 2 weeks. I'd sent individual texts asking about dietary restrictions and preferred arrival times. I'd confirmed attendance multiple times. My brother had responded with thumbs-up emojis to every single message, even asking what he could bring to help. I realized they'd probably made the restaurant reservation after I sent my dinner invitation. They chose celebrating his 5th attempt at a basic adult responsibility over acknowledging my actual achievement. The irony was suffocating. I'd bought my first house at 32 after years of careful planning and sacrifice, but his driver's license at 25 after multiple failures warranted the family celebration. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just about last night, but about the entire pattern. Every family gathering for the past decade had revolved around managing my brother's latest crisis or celebrating his minimal efforts. When I graduated college summa cum laude while working 30 hours a week, dinner was at Olive Garden with a grocery store cake. When he finally passed his remedial math class at community college at 23, they threw a backyard barbecue with catered food and invited the extended family. My promotion to senior accountant last year got a good for you text. His 2-week stint at a pizza delivery job got a Facebook post about being so proud of his work ethic. When I got my CPA certification, Mom's response was, "That's nice, dear. Maybe now you can help us understand our taxes better." By lunch, I'd made my decision. I texted back, "I can't come by today. I need some time to process what happened." It wasn't entirely diplomatic, but it wasn't accusatory either. I was trying to leave room for them to acknowledge what they'd done. Mom's response came within minutes. "This is about family. You need to be there. We're having a family meeting about important matters." A family meeting that, apparently I was required to attend but hadn't been included in planning. I stared at that text for a long time. The family. As if I hadn't been carrying this family financially and emotionally for half my adult life. As if showing up to my housewarming dinner wasn't also about family. As if my feelings and my milestone didn't qualify as important matters. I didn't respond. Instead, I spent my lunch break walking through my empty house, touching surfaces that belonged to me, opening cabinets I'd organized, standing in rooms where no one could just barge in demanding my attention or resources. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe fully. Thursday evening, I found myself staring at my high school graduation photo on the mantle, remembering exactly how this all began. I was 16 when my father injured his back on a construction site and couldn't work for 6 months. Mom worked part-time at Miller Dental Office, making $12 an hour. My sister had just started her sophomore year at State University, and my brother was 12 and too young to understand money problems. So I became the solution. 25 hours a week at Murphy's Diner, earning $7.25 an hour, plus tips that barely covered my gas money. I handed over $200 of every $280 paycheck to help with groceries and utilities. "Just until your father gets back on his feet," Mom promised. "You're so responsible and you're good with money. It's just temporary." My sister got to focus on her studies and her sorority activities. My brother got to stay a kid, playing video games and hanging out with friends after school. I got to grow up fast, learning to balance AP classes with dinner rushes, and learning that family love apparently came with financial obligations. Things never really got better. They just got reorganized around my contributions. When Dad went back to work 8 months later, he was making less money due to his injury limitations. When my sister graduated and moved in with her college boyfriend, I picked up her portion of family expenses. When my brother crashed Dad's truck at 17, texting while driving, I paid the $800 insurance deductible because you have a job and he's just learning. The family narrative became, she's so responsible, and she doesn't mind helping out, and she's always been mature for her age. But nobody ever asked if I minded. It was simply expected, the way you expect the sun to rise or the bills to arrive monthly. By 22, when I graduated college, I was contributing $400 monthly to their household budget while paying my own student loans. My brother, now 19, was living at home rent-free, working sporadically at various retail jobs that he'd quit whenever he got bored or had conflicts with managers. Every few months brought a new crisis requiring financial assistance, car repairs, legal fees from a minor traffic incident, money to help him get back on his feet after losing another job. At 25, when I finally saved enough to move out, Mom cried. Not from pride that I was achieving independence, but because who's going to help with the emergency expenses? I compromised, moving into a shared apartment but still contributing $300 monthly to their household. My brother, now 22, was collecting unemployment and had decided college wasn't his path. The pattern was so ingrained that I didn't recognize it as unusual until my college roommate pointed it out during senior year. "Wait, your family asks you for money every month?" she'd said, incredulous. "Even my divorced parents send me care packages, not the other way around. That's really weird." But I'd convinced myself this was normal. This was love. This was what families did for each other. Except the support only seemed to flow one direction, and I was always the source, never the recipient. My brother's various failures became family projects requiring everyone's emotional investment. His driving test attempts were treated like major life events. Each failure necessitated family meetings to discuss what went wrong and how we can help him succeed next time. When he finally passed on Tuesday, it apparently warranted a celebration dinner that took precedence over my housewarming. I pulled up my bank statements from the past year on my laptop. The numbers were staggering when I added them up. $1,700 to help with their heating bill during that cold snap in February. $450 for my brother's car registration and inspection. $800 when Mom needed dental work not covered by insurance. $325 for his car insurance when he couldn't make the payment. $600 for various emergencies that somehow always coincided with my brother wanting new gaming equipment or concert tickets. That didn't include the emotional labor, the midnight phone calls when he'd gotten into another fender bender, the family meetings to discuss his future plans, the constant mediating between him and our parents when he'd disappear for days without calling home. Meanwhile, my achievements were met with polite acknowledgement at best. My CPA certification earned a good for you and suggestions about how I could now help them with tax preparation. My promotion came with congratulations, followed immediately by hope that maybe now you can increase your monthly contribution. Sitting in my own kitchen, in my own house, staring at those bank statements, I realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in 16 years, I had a space where I set the rules, where my success wasn't immediately redistributed to solve someone else's problems, where I could say no without someone walking into my room to continue the argument. The house represented more than home ownership. It represented the possibility of building a life based on my own priorities, rather than constantly managing other people's crises. The road to buying this house was lonelier than I'd ever admitted to anyone, even myself. 5 years of 60-hour work weeks, taking on every tax preparation client during busy season, every small business bookkeeping contract I could find. While my brother spent weekends sleeping until 2 p.m. and playing video games until dawn, I was at my desk building spreadsheets and calculating exactly how much I needed to save each month to qualify for a mortgage. My first apartment after leaving the family home was a disaster that taught me hard lessons about trusting people. 2 roommates who treated our shared kitchen like their personal dumping ground and borrowed my food without asking. When I labeled my items in the refrigerator, they called me uptight and controlling. When I bought a mini fridge for my bedroom to protect my groceries, they held an intervention about my trust issues and antisocial behavior. The second apartment was worse. My roommate threw parties every weekend, leaving me to clean up beer bottles and pizza boxes before I could use my own living room. She'd invite friends to crash on our couch for weeks at a time, never asking permission, never contributing to utilities that jumped from $80 to $200 monthly. When I finally confronted her about boundaries and basic respect, she moved out without notice, leaving me to cover $1,400 in rent for 3 months until I found someone else. Through it all, I was still sending money home every month like clockwork. Mom would call with updates about my brother's latest venture, the time he wanted to become a day trader after watching YouTube videos, the period when he was convinced he'd make it as a fitness influencer, despite never working out, the months he spent learning guitar before deciding music wasn't fulfilling enough. Each new dream required family investment. Not just emotional support, but actual money for equipment, courses, startup costs. And somehow, I was always the designated investor, the one with steady income and good credit, who could afford to take risks on family. I was 28 when I opened a separate savings account at a different bank, one I didn't tell anyone about. Every time I got a bonus, picked up freelance work, or had a month with lower expenses, I'd deposit the extra money there. It felt like rebellion, keeping my own earnings secret from people who'd always known exactly how much I made and felt entitled to input on how I spent it. The house hunting process was entirely solitary by choice. Real estate agents would ask about my husband or partner, surprised that a single woman was looking at 3-bedroom homes. Planning for the future? They'd ask with knowing smiles. I never explained that I wanted space because I'd never had it. Rooms where I could close the door and nobody would barge in asking for favors or money or emotional support for their latest crisis. I fell in love with this house the moment I walked through the front door. The previous owners, an elderly couple moving to Florida, had painted the walls in warm, welcoming colors. The kitchen had enough counter space for me to bake without fighting for room with someone else's mess. The master bedroom had built-in shelves where I could display my books I'd been keeping in boxes for years because shared spaces never felt permanent enough for proper unpacking. The backyard sold me completely. That oak tree was at least 50 years old, with branches strong enough to support a swing someday if I ever had kids. But more immediately, it offered privacy. No neighbor could see into my windows. No one could monitor my comings and goings. No one could judge whether I was being responsible enough with my space. The mortgage application required 3 references. I listed my supervisor, my personal banker, and my college friend who lived in Oregon. Not one family member, because I knew they'd somehow find a way to complicate even this process, to make it about their needs rather than my achievement. Closing day was anticlimactic in the best possible way. Just me, the sellers, and our respective agents signing papers in a sterile conference room at the title company. I'd imagined my parents being there, maybe taking photos of me signing the deed, celebrating this milestone with the same enthusiasm they'd shown for my brother's driver's license. Instead, I took a selfie in the empty living room and texted it to my college friend, who responded with celebration emojis and "so proud of you." Moving day was professional movers and me directing traffic. My sister had offered to help but was swamped with wedding planning. Her own wedding that was still 18 months away but apparently required daily attention. My brother said he'd definitely try to stop by but never showed up. Mom and Dad had a doctor's appointment that couldn't be rescheduled, despite being routine annual physicals. That first night, sitting on my couch in my living room eating takeout Chinese food, I experienced something I'd never felt before. Complete control over my environment. No one could walk into my space uninvited, eat my food, or assume access to my resources. The silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was the sound of my own life beginning. Friday afternoon, they descended on my house like a well-organized corporate delegation. I'd finally agreed to meet after Mom called my direct work line, which crossed a boundary I hadn't even known I needed to establish. They arrived at 5:30 p.m. sharp in a caravan. Mom and Dad in their sedan, my sister and her husband in their SUV, and my brother in the truck I'd helped him buy 2 years ago. Mom immediately started gushing about the house, touching surfaces and opening cabinets as if she were conducting a real estate inspection. "Such a smart investment," she kept saying, while Dad examined the windows and electrical outlets with his contractor's eye. My sister complimented the paint colors but suggested I should have consulted her first, since she has an eye for interior design, from watching home improvement shows. My brother made himself comfortable on my couch, feet up on my coffee table, and announced with startling confidence, "We need to discuss some incredible opportunities that could benefit everyone." He'd come prepared. The manila folder he carried contained printouts, market research, financial projections, even a rough business plan typed up and bound with a clear cover. My brother, who'd never held a job longer than 8 months, who'd failed basic math twice in community college, had apparently spent considerable time preparing a presentation about his new venture, a food truck specializing in fusion comfort food. "The street food market is exploding," he explained, spreading papers across my coffee table like a seasoned entrepreneur. "Food trucks have lower overhead than traditional restaurants, and there's huge demand in the downtown area. I've researched permits, licensing requirements, even identified the perfect vehicle." The startup costs were outlined in neat columns: $45,000 for a used food truck he'd found online, $8,000 for commercial kitchen rental and equipment, $4,000 for permits and inspections, $3,000 for initial inventory and supplies. Total investment needed, $60,000. "We've run all the numbers," my sister chimed in, as if she'd been involved in this planning. "The return on investment could be substantial. Food trucks are really hot right now, especially with the lunch crowd downtown." Dad cleared his throat and delivered what was obviously a rehearsed speech about family supporting family, about how my brother had finally found his calling after exploring different options, about how this was different from his previous ideas because he'd done the research and developed a real business plan. Then came the practical requests, delivered with the confidence of people who'd never doubted I'd say yes. First, could I refinance my house to access the equity for the loan? I'd only lived here 2 weeks, but with my excellent credit and steady employment, the bank would approve a cash-out refinance easily. The interest rates were better than traditional business loans, and it would be a win-win situation. But that wasn't all. Mom had been researching tax advantages for small businesses, and if I registered my brother's food truck company at my address, they could claim home office deductions. It would help both of us, she explained, since I'd get tax benefits too and could help him manage the bookkeeping. Finally, there was what they called the security issue. Since I was a single woman living alone in a house this size, wouldn't it make practical sense to add Mom as a co-owner on the deed? Just for safety purposes, in case something happened to me. The house wouldn't get tied up in probate, and I'd have someone looking out for my interests. It's really just smart financial planning, Dad added. You're being responsible by thinking ahead. I listened to this entire presentation in growing disbelief and admiration for their thoroughness. They'd spent more time planning how to use my house, my credit, and my resources than they'd ever spent planning anything for my benefit. The business plan was detailed and professional looking, but nowhere did it mention my brother's complete lack of experience in food service, customer relations, or business management. His employment history was a series of retail jobs he'd quit due to personality conflicts with management, or because he wasn't being appreciated. His last position at a sporting goods store had ended when he was fired for chronic lateness and spending too much time on his phone during shifts. The best part is, you wouldn't just be helping family, my brother continued enthusiastically. You'd be investing in a proven business model with huge growth potential. I've already designed the menu, planned the marketing strategy, even researched the best locations for parking permits. He showed me hand-drawn logos and a menu featuring items like Korean BBQ mac and cheese and buffalo chicken grilled cheese, fusion comfort food that sounded impressive but required cooking skills I'd never seen him demonstrate. So what do you think? He asked, leaning forward expectantly while everyone waited for my response. When can we get started with the paperwork? I'd like to have the truck operational by next month. The room fell silent as they waited. I could feel the weight of 16 years of family expectations pressing down on me. All those times I'd said yes when they needed money, help, or someone to clean up their messes. This was the moment where I was supposed to nod, smile, and ask how quickly I could get to the bank. Instead, I said the word that would change everything. No. The word hung in the air like a smoke alarm at 3 a.m., impossible to ignore and demanding immediate attention. My brother laughed nervously, as if I'd made a joke he didn't understand. Come on, don't you want to hear the revenue projections? We can go through them line by line. The profit margins are incredible. I said no, I repeated, my voice steadier than I felt. To all of it. The refinancing, the business address, adding names to my deed. No to the entire proposal. That's when their real personalities emerged. The polite business presentation facade crumbled, revealing the family dynamics I'd been navigating my entire adult life. My brother's face went through a rapid transformation, confident to confused to indignant. What do you mean, no? We're family. This is what families do for each other. I'm not asking for charity here. I'm offering you an investment opportunity. Mom's eyes filled with tears, the same tears that had guilted me into compliance for years. Honey, I don't think you understand how much this means to him. He's finally found his passion, something he's truly excited about. You can't just crush his dreams because you're afraid of taking a small risk. A small risk? I asked. You want me to put my house up as collateral for a food truck operated by someone who's never worked in food service and has never run a business. That's not a small risk. Dad leaned forward, using the stern voice that had made me feel guilty as a teenager. You're not thinking clearly. You've gotten caught up in having your own place and lost sight of what's truly important. We raised you better than this selfishness. My sister tried a different approach. The reasonable mediator she'd always played. Look, I know you've worked hard for this house, but you can't just cut yourself off from family now that you have some success. What if you needed help someday? You'd want us there for you, right? The manipulation was so familiar it almost worked. The guilt, the accusations of selfishness, the suggestion that my boundaries were somehow betraying family values. But sitting in my own living room, surrounded by furniture I'd bought with my own money, I found strength I didn't know existed. I've needed help for 16 years, I said, my voice growing stronger. I needed help when I was working 25 hours a week in high school while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. I needed help when I was paying my own college tuition while contributing $400 monthly to household expenses. I needed help when I was living with terrible roommates because I couldn't afford my own place since I was supporting this family financially. Where were all of you then? That's different, Mom protested, wiping her eyes dramatically. You were capable. You could handle those challenges. He's more sensitive. He needs more support to find his path. He's 25 years old, I said firmly. He's not sensitive. He's enabled, and I'm done enabling him. The room erupted. My brother jumped up from the couch, pacing angrily. This is unbelievable. You get a little success and suddenly you think you're better than your own family? I'm trying to build something here, create a real business, and you just want to tear me down. I'm not tearing you down. I'm protecting myself. If you want to start a food truck business, get a business loan from a bank. Put together a real business plan with actual experience and collateral. Don't ask me to risk my home for your untested idea. Dad stood up, his face red with anger. Fine. Let's say you don't want to help with the business loan. What about adding your mother to the house deed? That's just common sense estate planning. You're being paranoid and short-sighted. This house is mine, I said, standing my ground literally and figuratively. I saved for it alone, I qualified for the mortgage alone, and I will own it alone. No one else's name goes on the deed, ever. But what if something happens to you? Mom asked, the tears flowing freely now. What if you have an accident or get sick? We'd have no way to help you. No legal standing to make decisions. Then I'll have a will, which will be written by my attorney, not by family members with financial interests in my property. The accusations flew fast and furious after that. I was ungrateful, selfish, delusional about my own success. I'd forgotten where I came from and who had supported me. I was letting money change me into someone they didn't recognize. But through it all, I remained calmer than I'd ever been during a family confrontation. Maybe because for the first time, I wasn't fighting to defend my right to have boundaries. I was simply stating that they existed. I need all of you to leave now, I said, when the shouting finally died down. The silence was deafening. Mom whispered, Leave? You're kicking your own family out? Yes, this is my home, and you're no longer welcome here today. When you're ready to have a respectful conversation that doesn't involve asking me to risk my financial security for an untested business venture, you can call me. But until then, please go. They left in a shocked, muttering procession, gathering their papers and their wounded pride. I watched from my living room window as they stood in my driveway for 15 minutes, probably strategizing their next approach. But I'd drawn a line in the sand, and for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't going to cross back over it to make other people comfortable. The guilt campaign began within hours of them leaving my house, orchestrated with military precision. First came the text messages to our family group chat, which I'd forgotten to leave after setting my boundaries. Mom posted a photo of my brother looking dejected with the caption, "Some people give up on dreams, while others give up on family." My sister shared a link to an article titled, "The Psychology of Success: Why Some People Become Selfish After Achieving Goals." By Saturday morning, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls from extended family members I hadn't heard from in months. My father's sister Patricia called at 7 a.m. to tell me she was deeply disappointed in my attitude toward family. She'd apparently been briefed on the situation and had strong opinions about my selfishness and ingratitude. Uncle Jim, Mom's brother, sent a long text message about how family loyalty was more important than money, and how I was breaking your mother's heart by refusing to help my brother achieve his dreams. Even my cousin from Phoenix, who I'd seen maybe 5 times in my adult life, weighed in via Facebook Messenger, saying she'd heard I was going through a difficult phase and maybe needed to reconsider my priorities. I realized they'd spent the weekend calling everyone in our extended family, crafting a narrative that painted me as the villain. According to their version, I was a successful but cold-hearted daughter who'd forgotten her humble beginnings and abandoned her struggling family in their time of need. The social media posts were passive-aggressive masterpieces designed to make me look heartless without mentioning my name directly. My brother shared a motivational quote, "The people who believe in your dreams are the ones worth keeping in your life." Mom posted throwback photos of family dinners from years ago, with captions like, "Missing the days when we all supported each other unconditionally." My sister was more subtle but equally manipulative, sharing an article about successful women who lose touch with their values and posting photos from charity events with captions about the importance of giving back to those who need help. Monday brought escalation. My brother showed up at my office building during lunch break, carrying that same manila folder and looking pathetic in wrinkled clothes and an unwashed face. He'd clearly crafted his appearance to maximize sympathy. My colleagues watched curiously as he cornered me in the lobby, pleading loudly about missed opportunities and family obligations. "Please, just look at the numbers one more time," he begged, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I know you're smart with money. You'll see this makes financial sense. I'm your brother. Don't you want to see me succeed?" When I firmly told him to leave, he got louder and more dramatic. "I can't believe my own sister won't even listen to my business proposal. What happened to you? Success really does change people." My supervisor had to intervene when he refused to leave the building. The security guard escorted him out while he shouted about family loyalty and how I was destroying his dreams. My coworkers spent the rest of the day looking at me with mixture of curiosity and sympathy. That evening, I found Mom sitting in her car in my driveway when I came home from work. She'd been there for who knows how long, waiting in the August heat like some kind of guilt-inducing martyr. She followed me to my front door with tears and accusations already flowing. "I don't recognize the person you've become," she said, her voice breaking with practiced emotion. "The daughter I raised would never abandon her family like this. Maybe those roommates you lived with changed you, made you cold and selfish. Or maybe success has just gone to your head." When I wouldn't invite her inside to continue the conversation, she played her nuclear option. "Fine. If you want to pretend we don't exist, we'll respect that decision. But don't come crying to us when you realize that money and houses can't replace the people who truly love you. We won't be waiting forever." The silent treatment lasted exactly 72 hours, long enough for them to realize I wasn't going to cave under pressure, but not long enough for them to lose momentum in their campaign. Then came phase 2, enlisting outside reinforcements. Wednesday evening brought a call from Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman from our church, who'd known me since I was 12. "Your mother is so worried about you, dear," she said in her grandmother voice. "She says you're isolating yourself and making some very poor financial decisions. Maybe you should reconsider helping your brother. He's such a sweet young man with big dreams." I explained politely that there had been some family disagreements about boundaries, but Mrs. Henderson had clearly gotten a very different version of events. In her understanding, I was a successful but troubled young woman who needed guidance about family loyalty and Christian values. Thursday brought a call from my old high school guidance counselor, now retired, who somehow had gotten my current phone number. She left a long voicemail about family healing and the importance of supporting those we love during challenging times. Apparently, my mother had reached out to her as a neutral party, who might be able to talk sense into me. By Friday, even my mail carrier was looking at me strangely. I suspected they'd been sharing their version of events throughout the neighborhood, painting themselves as concerned parents dealing with a difficult daughter who'd been corrupted by success. The weekend brought their most manipulative move yet. My brother posted a GoFundMe page for his food truck venture, complete with a heartbreaking backstory about family struggles and dreams deferred. The description painted me as a wealthy, heartless sister who refuses to help despite having the means and resources to change a family member's life. The post included photos of our family from happier times, making it look like I'd abandoned people who'd always supported me. Within hours, family friends and church members were sharing the link with comments like, "So sad when family turns their back," and "praying for healing in this family situation." I watched my reputation in our small community get systematically destroyed, one social media post at a time. But I also realized something important. Their reaction proved I'd made the right decision. People who truly cared about my well-being wouldn't launch a public campaign to pressure me into risking my financial security for their convenience. By the second week of their campaign, I realized the social media pressure was just the opening act. I needed to protect myself more seriously because people who would launch a public guilt campaign wouldn't hesitate to escalate to more direct methods. I started with the obvious security measures: new locks on all exterior doors, deadbolts that couldn't be picked with a credit card or bypassed with the tricks Dad had taught us as kids. I'd grown up in a house where privacy was non-existent, where family members walked into each other's rooms without knocking, where "what's mine is yours" was the enforced family motto. That dynamic wasn't following me into my own home. Next, I called my bank and credit union to update my emergency contacts and add password protection to all my accounts. The customer service representative seemed confused when I requested removing my mother from my emergency contact list. "Is everything all right at home, ma'am? Usually people add family members, not remove them. How do you explain that home has become the primary threat to your financial security?" That the people who raised you are now the ones you need protection from? I settled for explaining there had been some family disagreements about money, and left it at that. The credit freeze was more complicated but absolutely necessary. I'd helped my brother fill out job applications for years, which meant he had access to my social security number, birth date, and mother's maiden name, all the standard security questions banks use. Mom knew every detail of my financial history from years of me sharing my successes and asking for family support during struggles. Installing a locking mailbox felt paranoid, but I'd seen too many stories about family members intercepting bank statements and pre-approved credit offers. Dad had been a construction worker for 30 years. He knew how to get into things that were supposed to be secure. I wasn't taking chances with financial documents showing up where they could access them. The home security system was the biggest expense. $89 monthly for cameras at front and back doors, motion sensors, and 24/7 monitoring. The installation technician asked if I'd had a break-in recently. Just being proactive, I told him, which was partially true. I was being proactive against a break-in that hadn't happened yet but felt increasingly inevitable. I also started documenting everything systematically. Screenshots of every social media post, printouts of text messages, detailed logs of phone calls with dates and times. My college friend who worked in legal aid had suggested keeping records just in case things escalate further, and her advice was proving prescient. Things escalated the following Thursday evening. I came home from work to find my mother's car in my driveway and lights on inside my house. My heart stopped. I was absolutely certain I'd locked up that morning and armed the security system. I'd developed an obsessive routine around it. I called the police from my car, my hands shaking as I explained the situation. 2 officers arrived within 8 minutes, and we discovered that Mom had somehow gotten inside through a basement window that the previous owners had never properly secured. The security system hadn't detected it because it was an older window without a sensor. She was sitting calmly at my kitchen table, going through my mail like she had every right to be there. She says she was worried about you and needed to check if you were taking care of yourself properly, one officer explained after talking to her. She mentioned you've been acting strangely since buying the house, and she wanted to make sure you weren't having some kind of mental health crisis. Mom played the concerned parent role perfectly, complete with tears and worried expressions about how I'd been cutting myself off from family and making irrational financial decisions. She even suggested I might be having a breakdown and needed professional help. The officers were sympathetic but firm. She had to leave immediately and couldn't return without my explicit permission. They issued a formal trespassing warning and explained that future violations could result in arrest. After they drove away with my mother following behind in her car, I spent 3 hours securing that basement window and adding motion sensors to every possible entry point. The violation of my space felt like a physical assault. This was supposed to be my sanctuary, the place where I could finally feel safe and in control. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the security camera feeds on my phone, jumping at every car that drove past the house. Every shadow seemed threatening, every sound potentially dangerous. The next morning brought another violation that made my stomach drop. I discovered they'd been using my address to apply for store credit cards in my brother's name, listing me as a reference and claiming he lived at my house. The credit freeze caught most of the applications, but it was clear they weren't giving up on finding ways to involve me in their financial schemes. I spent my lunch break at a legal aid office, consulting with an attorney about restraining orders and my options for protecting myself from family members who seemed determined to treat my boundaries as suggestions rather than requirements. The attorney I met with, Rebecca Martinez, was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in family financial abuse and elder exploitation. She didn't seem surprised by my story, which was both validating and disturbing. Unfortunately, this pattern is more common than people realize, she said, reviewing my carefully organized documentation. Family members often feel entitled to each other's resources, especially when there's a long history of financial dependence and one person consistently functioning as the family's financial safety net. She helped me understand that what was happening had legal names: financial abuse, harassment, and potentially identity theft. They're using emotional manipulation, family obligations, and social pressure to try to control your financial resources, she explained. The fact that they broke into your home shows they're escalating beyond normal family dysfunction into potentially criminal behavior. Armed with this professional validation, I returned home more determined than ever to maintain my boundaries. But my family wasn't finished testing how far they could push before facing real consequences. The following week, I discovered they'd attempted to take out a small business loan using my old apartment address and outdated financial information they still had on file. My brother had listed me as a co-signer and business partner for the food truck venture without my knowledge or consent. The bank called my work number to verify employment details, which is how I found out about the fraud attempt. Mr. Thompson listed you as his business partner and co-signer for a $60,000 commercial vehicle loan, the loan officer explained. We need to verify your income and willingness to guarantee the loan. When I explained that I'd never agreed to co-sign anything and had no business relationship with my brother, the loan officer became very interested. Sir, this appears to be fraudulent use of your information. We'll need to flag this application, and you should probably file a police report. The loan was immediately denied due to my credit freeze and lack of proper documentation, but the attempt itself was criminal. They'd forged my signature on preliminary paperwork and used my social security number without authorization. Their next strategy was even more manipulative. My sister called my supervisor at work, claiming there was a family emergency and I might need extended time off to get the help I needed. She painted a picture of someone having a mental breakdown, isolating from family, making irrational financial decisions, possibly experiencing depression or anxiety. Your sister seemed very concerned about your well-being, my supervisor told me during our weekly meeting. She mentioned you might be going through some kind of crisis and could benefit from our employee assistance program. Is everything okay at home? I had to explain that my family was upset about my refusal to co-sign a business loan and were now trying to sabotage my professional reputation. It was embarrassing and infuriating, but my supervisor was more supportive than I'd expected. I've seen this before, she said. Family members who can't accept boundaries sometimes try to prove the person is mentally unstable as a way to regain control. Your work performance has been exemplary, and frankly, buying your first house shows excellent financial planning, not instability. But they weren't done with workplace harassment. Dad showed up at my office building one afternoon, waiting by the elevator banks when I left for the day. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, and for a moment, the familiar guilt began creeping back in. Can we just talk? He asked, his voice softer than it had been during our confrontation. 5 minutes. I'll buy you coffee and we can discuss this like adults. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We sat in the cafe across from my office building while he delivered what was clearly another prepared speech. This one focused on family loyalty and forgiveness. Your brother isn't asking for charity, he insisted, stirring sugar into his coffee with shaking hands. He's asking for an investment in his future from someone who's always been successful with money. You'd be getting paid back with interest, and you'd be helping family at the same time. Dad, he's never held a job for more than 8 months. He's never managed a budget or run any kind of business. He failed his driving test 4 times. What evidence do you have that he can successfully operate a food truck? Everyone deserves a chance to follow their dreams. You got your chances. College. Good jobs. Now this house. Why shouldn't he get his chance too? Because my chances came from my own work and planning. I'm not obligated to fund other people's dreams with my financial security. The conversation went in familiar circles for 25 minutes before I finally stood up to leave. Dad grabbed my arm as I turned away, his grip firmer than necessary. Your mother is making herself physically sick over this situation, he said, his voice taking on a threatening edge. She barely eats, barely sleeps, cries every day about losing her daughter. If something happens to her health because of the stress you're causing, that'll be on your conscience forever. That night, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper when I left the gym. Your neighbors are starting to talk about what kind of person you really are. Maybe you should care more about your reputation in this community. No signature, but I recognized my brother's handwriting from years of helping him with homework and job applications. I looked around the parking lot and noticed Mrs. Kim from 3 houses down watching from her car. She'd been friendly when I moved in, bringing over homemade cookies and welcoming me to the neighborhood. Now she just stared with obvious disapproval and drove away when she saw me looking back. They were systematically poisoning every relationship in my life, every space where I felt comfortable. Work, neighborhood, church, gym. Nowhere was safe from their campaign to isolate me and force me back into compliance with their demands. When the direct harassment and workplace interference failed to break my resolve, they switched to a strategy that was somehow more disturbing. Complete silence. For 10 days, my phone didn't ring with guilt-inducing calls. No text messages appeared in our family group chat. No extended relatives contacted me with concerned lectures about family loyalty. The silence worried me more than the confrontations had. At least when they were actively pressuring me, I knew what they were thinking and planning. This radio silence felt ominous, like the calm before a much more serious storm. I found out what they'd been planning when my colleague Jenny mentioned seeing my family at Romano's Steakhouse the previous weekend. They looked like they were having some kind of serious meeting, she said during our coffee break. Your brother was showing everyone papers and your mom looked really upset. Is everything okay? They'd held a family strategy session without me, a meeting to decide how to deal with my situation, as if I were a problem to be solved rather than an adult making reasonable financial decisions. The fact that they didn't even pretend to include me in discussions about my own life showed how little they respected my autonomy. The silence ended abruptly the following Friday, when their final, desperate attempts began in earnest. First came the emotional manipulation through religious authority. Pastor Williams from our church called, explaining that my mother had reached out to him about our family crisis. Your mother is very concerned about the division in your family, he said in his counseling voice. She feels that pride and material success might be interfering with your Christian values of helping those in need. Would you be willing to come in for a family counseling session? I explained politely that this was a financial boundary issue. Not a spiritual crisis, but Pastor Williams had clearly gotten a very different version of events. In his understanding, I was a successful but spiritually troubled parishioner who needed guidance about putting family obligations before personal comfort. When religious pressure didn't work, they tried exploiting my professional reputation more aggressively. My brother appeared at my office building again, but this time he brought props, a wheelchair from somewhere and a pair of crutches, making himself look disabled and desperate as he waited for me in the lobby. Please, I just need to talk to my sister, he told the security guard loudly enough for everyone to hear. She's the only family member who can help me get back on my feet after my accident. There had been no accident. This was pure theater designed to make me look heartless in front of my colleagues and clients. When I confronted him about the deception, he abandoned the props and returned to standard guilt tactics. You're destroying this family, he said, loud enough to attract attention from everyone in the building lobby. Mom cries herself to sleep every night because of what you're doing to us. All I'm asking for is help starting a legitimate business, and you act like I'm trying to steal from you. Security had to escort him out again, but the damage was done. My coworkers spent the rest of the day giving me sympathetic looks and asking carefully worded questions about my family situation. The most disturbing escalation came the following weekend, when I discovered they'd been trying to access my financial accounts, using information from when I'd lived at home. My bank called Saturday morning to report suspicious login attempts on my online banking. Someone had tried to access my account 17 times using variations of passwords I'd used years ago. We've temporarily frozen your online access as a security precaution, the customer service representative explained. Someone has been trying to guess your login credentials, and they seem to have some personal information about you. They knew your social security number and previous addresses. I spent 2 hours at the bank branch updating all my security information and passwords, adding additional authentication steps, and reviewing account activity for any unauthorized transactions. The teller mentioned that this type of family financial abuse was becoming more common, especially when adult children tried to establish independence from financially dependent relatives. That same weekend, I discovered they'd somehow obtained a key to my house, probably from the real estate agent or previous owners, and had been entering when I wasn't home. My security system showed no signs of forced entry, but items had been moved around, mail had been opened, and there were muddy footprints in my kitchen that definitely weren't mine. I spent Sunday installing additional locks, changing all the access codes on my security system, and reviewing weeks of camera footage to figure out when and how they'd been getting inside. The violation of my privacy felt like a physical assault on my sense of safety. Monday brought their most manipulative attempt yet. They tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. I received a call from Adult Protective Services explaining that they'd received a complaint about a vulnerable adult who might be experiencing a mental health crisis and making unsafe financial decisions. Your family is concerned that you're isolating yourself and might be experiencing depression or anxiety that's affecting your judgment, the social worker explained. They've requested a wellness check and evaluation to ensure you're capable of managing your own affairs. The complaint painted me as someone having a breakdown, refusing family contact, making impulsive financial decisions like buying an expensive house, showing paranoid behavior, and potentially being influenced by unnamed outside parties who were taking advantage of my mental state. I had to take time off work to meet with the social worker and provide documentation that I was mentally competent and financially stable. It was humiliating and exhausting, but it also clarified something important. They weren't just trying to get money from me anymore. They were trying to take control of my life entirely. The Adult Protective Services investigation was the final straw that pushed me from defensive measures to legal action. After 3 hours of interviews, home visits, and financial document reviews, the social worker concluded that the complaint was unsubstantiated and appears to have been filed in bad faith by family members involved in a financial dispute. "This is actually more common than you might think," she explained as she packed up her paperwork. "Family members sometimes try to use our system to pressure relatives into compliance with their financial demands. Your home is well maintained, your finances are stable, and you show no signs of mental health issues that would affect your decision-making capacity. But the investigation had cost me 2 days of work, hundreds of dollars in legal consultation fees, and a significant amount of stress. More importantly, it showed that my family was willing to involve government agencies in their campaign to control my resources." I returned to attorney Rebecca Martinez with a much more serious question. What were my legal options for stopping this harassment permanently? "You have grounds for restraining orders against all of them," she said after reviewing the new documentation I'd compiled. "The unauthorized entry into your home, the fraudulent loan applications, the Adult Protective Services complaint filed in bad faith, any one of these would justify legal protection. Combined, they show a pattern of escalating harassment." The restraining order process was more straightforward than I'd expected. The judge reviewed my evidence: photographs of the unauthorized entry, bank records of the fraudulent loan attempts, documentation of the APS complaint, screenshots of social media harassment, and granted temporary protection orders against my parents, brother, and sister. "This appears to be financial abuse escalating to stalking behavior," the judge noted during the hearing, which my family had been required to attend. "The respondents are prohibited from contacting the petitioner directly or indirectly, from coming within 500 feet of her residence or workplace, and from using her personal information for any financial applications or accounts." Watching them sit in the courtroom as the judge explained the legal consequences of violating the orders was surreal. Mom cried throughout the proceedings, playing the victim even in this setting. Dad looked angry and embarrassed. My sister seemed shocked that it had reached this point. My brother just looked confused, as if he genuinely couldn't understand how his behavior had led to legal intervention. The restraining orders gave me breathing room, but they also escalated the social consequences. Within days, church members and family friends were calling to express their shock and disappointment that I'd taken legal action against my own family. The narrative shifted from concern about my mental health to outrage about my betrayal of family loyalty. Mrs. Henderson from church left a voicemail that was both heartbreaking and infuriating. "I never thought I'd see the day when a child would have her own parents arrested for caring about her well-being. Your mother is devastated, absolutely devastated. I hope you're proud of yourself. But I also received unexpected support. My supervisor pulled me aside to let me know that HR had been briefed on the situation and would be watching for any workplace harassment attempts. We've dealt with family harassment cases before," she said. "You did the right thing protecting yourself legally." My neighbor from 2 houses down, an older man I'd only spoken to briefly, knocked on my door one evening with surprising news. "I wanted you to know that your family has been coming around the neighborhood asking questions about you," he said. "They've been suggesting you might be mentally unstable or involved with dangerous people. Most of us aren't buying it, but I thought you should know what they're saying." The restraining orders weren't perfect. They couldn't stop indirect harassment through mutual acquaintances, social media posts that didn't mention me by name, or the general community campaign to damage my reputation. But they did stop the direct confrontations, unauthorized entries, and fraudulent financial activities. 3 weeks after the legal proceedings, I received a certified letter from my brother's attorney. Apparently, he'd hired legal representation with money I could only assume came from his successful GoFundMe campaign. The letter was a formal demand for me to cease and desist from interfering with his legitimate business activities, and threatened to sue me for defamation and intentional interference with business relationships. I forwarded the letter to Rebecca Martinez, who laughed when she read it. "This is an intimidation tactic," she explained. "He has no legal grounds to sue you for protecting yourself from his fraudulent loan applications. If anything, this letter could be considered harassment in violation of his restraining order." The final piece of their legal strategy appeared a month later. They petitioned the court to have the restraining orders modified or dismissed, claiming I had filed them maliciously to punish my family for trying to help during a mental health crisis. Their petition included character references from church members, neighbors who'd been influenced by their version of events, and even a letter from my old high school guidance counselor attesting to their genuine concern for my well-being. But they made a critical error in their legal filing. My brother's attorney included details about the food truck business plan and timeline, inadvertently confirming that they'd been pressuring me to fund his venture. The petition also mentioned their legitimate concerns about my isolation and financial decision-making, which actually supported my claims about their attempts to control my resources. The judge denied their petition after a brief hearing, noting that the evidence still supported the need for legal protection. The respondents' continued focus on the petitioners' financial resources and their characterization of reasonable boundaries as mental health issues actually reinforces the court's concerns about their motivations. Leaving the courthouse that day, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer the family member who absorbed everyone else's problems and crises. I was legally protected from their harassment, financially secure in my own home, and finally free to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. 6 months after the restraining orders were finalized, I organized a second housewarming dinner. This time, I invited people who had shown genuine support during the most difficult period of my life: my supervisor and 2 colleagues from work, my neighbor who had warned me about my family's community campaign, Rebecca Martinez and her wife, and my college friend who flew in from Oregon specifically for the celebration. The table was set for 8 people, and every seat was filled by someone who respected my boundaries and celebrated my independence. We ate the same lasagna recipe I'd prepared for my family that first night, but this time the conversation was filled with laughter, genuine interest in each other's lives, and appreciation for being together. To new beginnings, Rebecca said, raising her wine glass, and to the courage it takes to choose yourself when everyone else expects you to choose them. The past 6 months had been transformative in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant drain of family financial emergencies and emotional crises, I'd been able to focus on building the life I actually wanted. I joined a book club at the local library, started taking Saturday morning yoga classes, and even signed up for a cooking class where I met other people who enjoyed trying new recipes. The restraining orders had held. There had been a few minor violations: my mother driving slowly past my house, my brother creating fake social media accounts to try to monitor my activities. But overall, they'd respected the legal boundaries even if they didn't understand or accept my personal ones. My professional life had flourished without the constant interruptions and workplace harassment. I'd been promoted to senior manager and was now earning $78,000 annually, more than enough to comfortably afford my mortgage and start building real savings for the first time in my adult life. The house had become everything I'd dreamed it could be. I'd painted the guest bedroom a cheerful yellow and turned it into a home office. The backyard garden was thriving: tomatoes, herbs, and flowers that I'd planted and tended myself. I'd even installed a porch swing under the oak tree where I spent weekend mornings with coffee and books. But the most significant change was internal. I'd learned to recognize manipulation tactics that had been so normalized in my family that I'd never questioned them. The guilt trips about abandoning family, the suggestions that my success was somehow selfish, the expectation that I should risk my security for other people's convenience. I could see all of it clearly now. My extended family's reaction had been mixed. Some relatives continued to view me as the villain who'd destroyed the family by refusing to enable my brother's dreams. But others had started reaching out privately, sharing their own stories of feeling pressured to solve other people's financial problems or sacrifice their goals for family harmony. My cousin from Arizona called one evening to tell me about her own struggles with family boundary issues. "Your situation made me realize that I've been funding my brother's lifestyle for years," she said. "He's 34 and I'm still paying his car insurance because family helps family. Maybe it's time I learned to say no too." The community reputation damage had mostly faded as people moved on to newer gossip and drama. Mrs. Kim from down the street had apologized for believing my family's version of events without hearing my side. Several church members had quietly expressed support, admitting they'd had their own experiences with financially manipulative family members. My brother's food truck venture had failed within 3 months. Without access to my credit or resources, he'd been unable to secure proper financing or navigate the complex permit requirements for mobile food service. The GoFundMe money had been spent on a used truck that needed extensive repairs he couldn't afford, and he'd eventually sold it at a loss. According to mutual acquaintances, he was now working part-time at a grocery store and still living with our parents. Mom had apparently developed stress-related health issues from our estrangement, though these seemed to manifest primarily when she wanted sympathy from church friends or extended family members. Dad had gone back to part-time construction work to help with household expenses, and my sister was dealing with her own financial pressures as her wedding costs escalated beyond their budget. Without my monthly contributions, they'd had to downsize their lifestyle and make the kinds of difficult financial decisions I'd been making alone for years. I felt sad about the family relationships I'd lost, but I didn't regret protecting myself. The sadness was for what could have been if they'd been capable of respecting my boundaries and celebrating my success without immediately trying to exploit it. As I cleaned up after the housewarming dinner, listening to my guests' laughter carrying from the living room, I realized I'd built something better than I'd originally planned. Not just a house that was legally mine, but a life surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. The oak tree in my backyard was already showing signs of spring growth, tiny buds promising new leaves and shade for the summer ahead. Like me, it was rooted in good soil, growing stronger each season, reaching toward the light without apology. Later, as I settled into bed in my own room in my own house, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete peace with my choices. I'd learned that sometimes loving yourself means disappointing people who've grown comfortable with your sacrifice. Sometimes protecting your dreams means saying no to people who've never respected your boundaries. My family had taught me many things over the years, but the most valuable lesson came from their reaction to my independence. Not everyone who claims to love you actually wants what's best for you. Some people love what you can do for them, not who you are when you're strong enough to choose yourself. I was finally home, in every sense of the word, and no one could take that away from me.